Lord, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock, our Redeemer. Amen. How many of you repress some memories? That's probably not a fair question to ask, because if you're repressing the memories, you don't even want to think about it, right? Memories that we try to repress, we try to forget. And there's certain triggers that might bring them back. There are triggers that evoke memory for us. Sounds, hearing a song, hearing a door close in a certain way. Smells, the smell of cut grass, the smell of the autumn leaves evokes certain memories. Tastes bring back that meal that you tried to forget, reminding you why you said you never wanted to have it again in the first place. Different things, different moments bring back memories. This can be difficult with grief, because grief is something that can be painful to return to again and again. And there may be someone that we have lost and that we yearn for, that we miss deeply. And there comes this point when the scar of grief can be overlooked. And we learn to live with that loss, but then there's a smell. Or we find an old shirt. Or we hear a recording. And all of a sudden the memories come flooding back. The memories of a loved one, the memories of someone that you hadn't thought about for years. And there's a mixture to these memories, isn't there? Some grief comes out of a place of joy, that you had such a deep relationship, such a good relationship with your spouse or your child. You remember going for walks with your loved one. You remember how your parents would read to you. You remember how your child used to have such wonder on their face, how your friend would call you unprovoked. And that grief is mixed with these good memories and that deep loss. There's other grief that comes out of a different kind of pain. Out of relationships that were more problematic, relationships that were strained and hurt, relationships where you never really could figure out how to talk to each other, where you knew that you could have been better to each other and never got there. And the memory brings back a hope that is lost, a complicated grief, a pain that's compounded with the reality that you'll never be with your loved one again. Memories that we may try to forget or bury come flooding back. The passage I read today from Isaiah speaks to a people who are in grief. They're in grief for their homeland. They've been forced to leave. We find them again in exile in Babylon. And there may be moments when they're reminded of what they've lost. There may be a moment when someone is cooking a meal from their homeland and they smell it and they start to talk about the Passover meal and it hurts. They may notice some birds flying and they may say, we remember every fall when these birds would fly over our own home and it hurts. They may hear someone without thinking starting to sing the songs of Zion and reminded of what they've lost. And it hurts. And what do we do when we encounter this pain, this flood of grief? So often we build up walls, don't we? I mean, you saw me sitting here with the children, and I mentioned Charlie Ward, and I started to get choked up. And what did I do? I buried it. Right? We try to push it down. We try to bring back the tears. We try to build up whatever walls we can so that the pain isn't there. We don't want to remember because it can hurt too much. And those walls show up in different ways for different people. And we see them probably at their most destructive with addictions, with running away, with destructive behaviors, trying to avoid the pain of the memory, the reality of the loss. Don't sing those songs in this exiled land. Don't make those foods in this place where we are not home. Don't speak of the memory of the loved one lost. It's into this pain, and it's through these walls that God is speaking through Isaiah. It's into this kind of sense of loss that God is speaking, and God is saying through Isaiah, I'm going to do a new thing with you. I'm going to have a feast for you. I'm going to make something happen that will break through every hurt that you feel now. And the first words that the Israelites need to hear is that God has not forgotten you. God has not forgotten you. There is nothing more isolating than grief. Because when you're grieving someone, you may have a family member, a friend, a sibling, even a twin, and grieving the same person, but your grief will always be different. You always grieve in your own way. It's the uniqueness of the relationship that you had with that person makes you feel that much more alone when you grieve. And part of the danger and the challenge of grief is that you may get to this place where you feel so isolated in your own darkness of pain and longing that you may find yourself saying, God has forgotten me. I see others and they seem to be doing well. I see people who seem to be living their lives well, and yet I still hurt. This passage from Isaiah speaks to those of us who feel in exile with our grief. God has not forgotten you. God instead is doing something, is stirring, and is working. Isaiah talks about this feast that God's preparing, this great feast, and that this shroud that seems to be hanging over the Israelites, this pall, this despair that seems to be hanging there, that God will tear it up, throw it away, and there will be hope, and there will be life. This is one of the few times in the Bible that we have God speaking directly to death and saying that death will be no more. This is a radical kind of assurance that we're given, this radical kind of hope that we're given that when our loved ones die, it is not the end, but that they are with God. At a previous church, I had gotten to know this one woman who had lost her husband and had been 20 years now in that grief. And it weighed on her. She missed her husband so deeply. She limped. Her back was bent. The pain was clear. And she had heard the passage. She had embraced Christ. She knew about the resurrection, but she still hadn't fully gotten there. To know that her husband was in the presence of God. She needed that hope. Who knows what it is that causes someone's heart to turn? Who knows what it is that causes someone's heart to open? But I remember the moment when I was sitting with her and talking with her, and we decided to pray about it, and something stirred. And she looked up from me and she said, "You, me, my husband is with God right now. And he's with my son as well." And she started to sit up a little bit more. She started to have a little more hope. This idea, this promise that God offers, that death is not the end, but that there is life with God, gave her hope as a hope for us all. And it's a kind of courage that we were called to embrace, to say that we will be with our loved ones again. That same woman, she had a health scare and ended up in the hospital. And I remember going to see her. And she said, "This might be the end." And I said, "Okay, Ruth, well, let's talk about that." And she said, "I need to know what I'm going to wear when I go to heaven." I said, like, okay. What do you want to wear? So I want to wear a red sweater. because I'm worried that there's so many people there that my husband won't be able to find me, so I need something red that will pop so he'll know where I am. What kind of hope that is to say, this might be near the end and I'm looking forward to being with my loved ones. What a radical change in her life from being bent and crippled to having hope and promise, so much that she started to think about the wardrobe she would wear when she got to heaven. She lived for years afterwards. Now I believe she is with God and her husband and her son. That's the kind of radical, forward-looking hope that's found in Isaiah that we're called to embrace in the depth, in the midst of our grief. I will tell you, every time I do a funeral, I don't know how people without faith can get through. I really don't know how you can wrestle with this kind of grief, with the loss, without knowing that there is life beyond it. But we have that assurance. We find it in Isaiah. We see it made concrete through the cross, through Jesus Christ, that death is not the end, that death has lost its sting, that we are not separate from our loved ones forever, but that we will be together in that sweet by and by. It's with that hope that I'm asking you to remember. It's with that kind of hope, this radical hope that we are not done, but we will be with the ones we miss again, that I'm calling on you to remember, to look at the loss, and to feel that pain and that hurt, but to also rejoice in who that person was and is for you. We're going to hear a song in just a moment that David Laros has written. And it's a gorgeous song, and as you listen to it, I want to invite you to make that courageous move and remember. And let your tears fall. Let it hurt a little. But also, offer God thanks. Now, and during the song, and about the middle, near the end of the song, and then I'm going to invite you to say the names of people who've been meaningful in your life. There is no statute of limitations for how long you need to remember. Just remember, say their names, and offer God thanks for the good fortune you had in knowing who they were.
But the weeds still return.
Thomas Blair, Willis Blair, Joseph Briganti, Jeffrey Reinhardt. And I invite you now to say the names of people on your heart. May God bless the memories of all those mentioned and all those who stir on our hearts, and may we find hope and assurance in knowing that they are in the presence of God. Now I invite you to sigh. The grief is heavy. The promise is just as heavy. Sigh and name that it still hurts. Sigh and own that we still yearn. Sigh and have that hope that this grief will not linger forever, but that we will be with our loved ones again. Amen.